Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome from wherever you're joining today. My name is Susan, and I'm joined by Dexibit founder Angie Judge. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Today, we're going to be digging into the topic of emotions and visitor voice. We're going to be talking all about how you can use AI to activate deep insight from freeform visitor feedback. But to begin with, I'm going to take you through a quick introduction to Dexibit for anyone that may be new here. Then we'll dive in to talk about emotions. So if you're new to Dexibit, we do data analytics specifically for visitor attractions. This is for both cultural organizations and commercial attractions. Our mission is to democratize data, and we do that by bringing together all sorts of data from around the visitor's experience in your venue's operations. So things like footfall, ticketing, CRM, point of sale, e-commerce, social web, weather, and so much more. I will share my screen now to show you what that looks like in the product. So here is Dexibit. It is a software as a service. You can invite as many users as you like, and you can build dashboards, reports, insights, and forecasts, which you can then turn into scheduled email reports at a click of a button. In Dexibit, we have an extensive library of visualizations. If you would like to add one to your dashboard, you can simply search for the topic you are looking for and click Add to add it in. And this is an example dashboard in Dexibit. So you see lots of data coming together in different ways from different data sources to get everything from very high level data right down through to the very detailed data. And this includes data from visitor feedback. So I will hand it over to Angie now. And perhaps, Angie, you can start us off with telling us how accurate emotions and visitor voice are.
Great. Thanks very much, Susan. So today we're going to talk all about bringing together freeform visitor remarks, and they can come from lots of different sources. So things like online reviews, on-site intercept surveys, evaluation studies, compliments and complaints, overheard visitor remarks, NPS surveys, lots of different places. And traditionally, when you're looking at visitor evaluation, you might sort of take some of this free-form comments where people are leaving lines of written text as part of their response and try and tag these things into various topics or say whether they're good or bad, and so forth. And the great thing about artificial intelligence is that it can do this very manual work for us. And to your point with your question, it has a level of accuracy involved in that. But the interesting thing is when you're doing it as a human being as well, you have a level of accuracy involved in your own work, both from the manual aspect of it that people can sort of tag the wrong thing, but also from an interpretation perspective. And that's where it can actually be more helpful to have artificial intelligence do this because it's more sort of consistent than having a person who might feel themselves differently on different days when they're reading through visitor feedback and read into it in different ways, or to have multiple people doing this and each applying their own lens. So it actually is a really helpful thing to have a machine come in and do that hard and very subjective work for us. So an average visitor attraction gets thousands and thousands of reviews every year, and they usually have a back history of around 10,000 or more, depending on the size and scale of the operation. So this is an incredibly rich source of insight on voice of the visitor, but it's also one that's also a huge job to do that manual processing for, to essentially turn qualitative feedback into quantitative information. So in Dexibit, you can analyze this data and run queries on it. Let me actually show you. I'll share my screen and we'll just take a look at what this data looks like in the flesh. So up the top here, you have some example visualizations that are running across in this case, what have we got? Like Google and Facebook reviews. So that data might include things like a star rating and the visitor's free-form comments. So here we can see like my average star rating, actually not so good for my pretend visitor attraction down in Antarctica. We've had some lows, particularly in April of last year, but things are sort of hovering below 4, which I should be worried about. And you can see why my star rating distribution here is kind of geared towards quite negative things, and I'd usually expect sort of 3/4 of them to be up at the 5-star amount. So in this case, my attraction's in a bit of trouble when it comes to visitor happiness. And here we can see those sort of free-form remarks that come along. See here from Google, a 2-star review. Here via email, another one talking about sort of poor hygiene practices in the cafe. So that's what the sort of raw data looks like. People give us a star rating, they give us a free-form remark, or they might give us an NPS score, and that might come with a free-form remark. So the data itself can be quite simple, but there is just so much value that you can unlock from this. So here, for example, we could run some simple queries on this data to pull out things, for example, like people who are complaining about food and beverage, which is why we're seeing all of these sorts of things about the cafe. So we could analyze the data that way. Or we can bring artificial intelligence to the table and do something a little more exciting. So as an add-on, Dexibit's artificial intelligence, it uses large language models, or LLMs. This is technology that's really similar to what's behind ChatGPT, and it can be used to unlock and activate value from within these free-form comments. So out of interest, just a bit of how this works. The first thing that we do is we break those big long reviews into what we call remarks, because often, particularly when people are leaving reviews online after they visit, they can be quite lengthy, and they can often be about some quite different things, like I really enjoyed the tour, I had an excellent guide, but my lunch in the cafe was substandard. So we need to split those reviews up into remarks in order to sort of consider each separately, because they might each have different sentiment or emotion, or be about different topics, for example. And we want to be able to capture all of that nuance within quite a large review. So once we've got those reviews split into remarks, we can then start to look at their sentiment is usually our first stop. So sentiment is just sort of the tone of the overall thing. So this is like, is the review positive or negative? Is it mixed or neutral? And we often like to show this as an emoji too, because we're really big on emojis at Dexibit. So we might sort of have a happy face or a grumpy face to represent that as well, which can be really useful in visualizations. So this is kind of like the first blush of being able to determine whether these reviews are happy or sad, or somewhere in between. You can see we've got sort of mixed and neutral tones as well. So that's sort of the first stop with AI, is to be able to determine that sentiment and have the machine do that, have artificial intelligence do that automatically for us. But to make this a little bit more exciting, the next thing that we can detect is the emotion. And what this is really fun for is we actually use I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly, the Plutchik's wheel of emotions. I can show you what this looks like because it's quite snazzy. This was developed by a guy called Robert Plutchik, who was a very famous psychologist, and he developed this as sort of the standard in being able to identify and label our emotions, which is really useful in psychology, but happens to also be really useful for artificial intelligence to have that sort of very quantifiable way of looking at this sort of data and information. So it mainly represents these emotions here in this sort of second band of joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, and anger, and anticipation. But you can see each of them sort of occurs on a bit of a spectrum. So here, for example, with joy, we might go as far as ecstasy and as deep as serenity, depending on how we're feeling that emotion. So if we come back to our example of our reviews, we can start to see how these emotions start to come through the visitor experience and through the voice of the visitor. And usually when we look at reviews, maybe not in the case of my visitors who are not very happy with my attraction, but for most visitor attractions, a huge amount of them are positive, and therefore the most common emotion will probably be joy. We usually see around 77% or thereabouts, and nearly just over 3/4 of reviews are 5 stars when we look at sort of Google reviews across our customer base as a whole. Sometimes sort of positive and joyful reviews can water down the feedback that's really actionable out of voice of the visitor. So we might often perhaps look at non-positive feedback, or we might sort of filter out joy as an emotion to be able to get to that really actionable stuff. So we sort of whittle down to the really useful things, which are often non-positive things. So interestingly, just as a side note as well, not all emotions are strictly positive or strictly negative. Joy typically is, but things like surprise, people can be surprised in a really bad way. We can be surprised in a good way. The cafe was more delicious than I expected. Or we can say something like, I was shocked to see the staff go from cleaning tables to serving food without washing their hands. So that would be surprise and a very negative sentiment. And we can combine all of these sorts of things together as well to sort of see how the reviews play out in terms of both their sentiment and emotion together, or sort of cross-section that with their star rating to see how sort of the emotions in this case play out across those star ratings, which can be really fun. So that's sort of looking at sentiment and emotion, but we can go even deeper with AI, which is where we get into the really, really fun stuff. And that is that we can ask the AI to give each one of these reviews a distinct topic. And this is really useful because it helps us to see what's sort of floating up to the surface, things like restrooms and food and beverage. But you can see that there is nuance here. So here I'm looking at sort of top 15, I think, in terms of my topics relating to my visitor experience that are non-positive. So we're filtering out some of that positive stuff. And you can see here that there is some interesting topics floating up to the surface, but you can see there's also some nuance here because I've got both experience and exhibition experience. Now you might think on first blush that those two things are the same, but they're probably quite different topics in reality, that the experience might relate to how someone is visiting the visitor attraction as a whole and their entire sort of holistic visitor experience, versus the exhibition experience, which might speak specifically to, say, a special exhibition that I'm hosting that might be temporary and about a particular topic. And maybe they've paid as an add-on to go to that special exhibition. So sometimes on the face of things, those topics can appear quite similar or neighboring, but they can be two quite different aspects. So it's nice to have the AI be able to sort of identify those distinct topics separately. But on top of that, we can also then ask it to determine a theme. So here on the right-hand side, we've asked it to determine, is this review specifically about the theme of ticketing, and that could relate to the ticket's price or the ticketing experience or the process of online reservations or whatever that topic, that subtopic was. And so this is more of a flag to say, here's our predefined prompt, and they might be a series of themes that Dexibit provides to say, we recommend you look at, staffing and health and safety and crime and things like that are common themes across all visitor attractions. And they might also be themes that the visitor attraction provides us and says specifically, we want to look at themes relating to Van Gogh and how people experience his art online and through the special exhibition and through some of the events that we're having. And we really want to call out any review that is potentially about that topic, even if the topic, or potentially about that theme, even if the topic is then actually more about, say, the ticket price, for example, that the AI might determine as kind of the primary topic of that review. So having those two things working in concert with each other makes this analysis more powerful and sort of unlocks greater value, because we're using both dimensions, because of course a review could have multiple themes sitting behind its primary topic, to be able to use it to analyze it in those different ways. So this is like a really useful thing to be able to do with this data. And then of course we can then dissect that with the actual data. So for example, looking at the average review ratings by their different topics to see, here for example, you can see I've got some lower ratings on things like staff behavior, and then some higher ratings on things like my events, where I'm getting 5-star reviews consistently about those. Or we can slice and dice it with those sentiment and emotions, to be able to sort of look at how those are coming through, or even just in reading the actual reviews, to be able to see some of that sentiment here. You can see that emoji or that emotion of surprise to help us quickly take that review content into context. And so that's a really fun thing to do with AI. As you can see, when we start off with something quite basic like the date, the star rating, and the comment, we then get into some quite quantifiable and unlocked insight to then be able to analyze tens of thousands of reviews or more at scale, in a really meaningful and deep way. Lastly, one final party trick that we can do with AI is we can actually ask it to determine whether there's a prescribed action recommended as a result of the review. And this is super, super fun. Here, for example, we can see the prescribed action is improving restroom cleaning standards, schedule, or inspections. And the review remark that came off was Antarctica Stadium provided a thrilling experience, but the restrooms were lacking. They were unclean and poorly maintained. This is a surprise emotion. It's a negative sentiment, even though it's actually sitting on a 4-star review, which I would generally determine to be quite positive. So that's a really interesting way to sort of extract what is otherwise some negative and quite actionable feedback. They've had a fantastic experience, but this thing has really taken away from that. So being able to flag those very actionable reviews and actually go as far as prescribing the action is really, really cool, to be able to do that with artificial intelligence. So that's a very, very quick run through AI. This is such an exciting area of technology that's changing really, really rapidly. And even just in the last year or so, this technology has gone a long way. We've been doing sort of some of this analysis for, I don't know, over 5 years or more, when it comes to our sort of origins of looking at natural language when it came to visitor reviews. But to be able to use these large language models in these different types of ways and really hone with them, and work with the AI to produce exceptional results has really sort of lifted and put these insights on steroids, which has been super fun to work with. So Susan, that was all I brought along today to take you through, but hopefully that's been interesting.
Thank you, Angie. That was really insightful. It's so interesting to see how we can capture the voice of the visitor here with AI. But before we go, we did have a question come through. Does my data get shared with the AI mind? Like when you share data with ChatGPT, then ChatGPT keeps it?
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, and it raises a massive topic as well. So I personally use ChatGPT in my own life for various things outside of work, and I might use it for some basic things at work. Like for example, if I was trying to think of a word and I've got that mental blank and I can't sort of grasp the right word, and I can say, I'm looking for this word about this thing, which I might normally interrupt the person sitting next to me to do. So I can do that with ChatGPT. Um, but one of the concerns with ChatGPT is that anything that you put into it, particularly on the sort of consumer and free editions, then there's information that's shared with ChatGPT. And of course, in a visitor attraction, we wouldn't want any of the data that belongs to the visitor attraction to be shared with ChatGPT. That would be a breach of most places' data policy. And so that's not a particularly safe way to do that. We'd also find if we were to try and do something like this with ChatGPT, that would quickly come up against the data limits of ChatGPT in terms of how much content you can put into it and how much it will produce out. So, for example, we've used ChatGPT to create our fake reviews, but using the consumer interface. It will only give you sort of 5 or 10 at a time, which is a long-winded process to get them. So when you're putting this data into Dexibit and when you're using AI in Dexibit, one of the huge advantages is that it all stays in the Dexibit ecosystem. And so that data isn't leaving Dexibit to go elsewhere and be used for other things. It's obviously subject to the enterprise terms and conditions that are part of that software agreement. And so it's a nice, safe, secure, compliant way to be able to enjoy the benefits of artificial intelligence and the promise without the peril, without the sort of risk of exposing data in that way. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of doing this kind of analysis in a closed environment like Dexibit, where you can sort of have that safety and security of knowing that your data is staying in that ecosystem, while you're still using all of the power of the large language models yourself. Cool.
That's
and
great.
I think
Thank you.
that might be it for today, is it?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for having me today, and thank you to everyone out there who's joining or watching this as a playback.
Thanks, everyone.